All right. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Morgan, and I'm an event manager with Politics and Prose Bookstore, and I'd like to welcome you all to PNP Live. Our noon event today is a special one. It is a joint event with the help of 30 plus bookstores, independent bookstores from around the United States. In order to keep the intro short, I will forgo naming every bookstore right now, but I will drop a link for each participating bookstore where you can buy a copy of The Twist of a Knife. You can ask our speakers a question this afternoon by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we will try to get to as many of those questions as we can towards the end of the program, but we apologize in advance if we don't have time to address your question. Also, there are auto captions for this event by hitting the live caption button at the bottom of the screen as well. Let me go ahead and introduce our guest for today. One of the world's most prolific and successful writers, Anthony Horowitz, may have committed more fictional murders than any other living author, working across so many media from books to TV, film, plays, and journalism. Several of his previous novels were instant New York Times bestsellers. His best-selling Alex Rider series for young adults has sold more than 19 million copies worldwide. As a TV screenwriter, he created both Midsomer Murders and the BAFTA-winning Foyle's War on PBS. Other TV works includes Poirot and the widely acclaimed miniseries Collison and Injustice. His award-winning novel, Magpie Murders, has been adapted into a 6-part miniseries that's now on BritBox, written by Horowitz himself and starring Lesley Manville. It will be on PBS Masterpiece this fall, and he currently lives in London. Horowitz will be in conversation with Shari, Lapena, the author of 6 internationally best-selling thrillers, including The Couple Next Door and Not a Happy Family. All of her books have been on the New York Times and UK Sunday Times bestsellers list. 3 have been Richard and Judy Book Club picks. Her books have also sold in 38 territories. She currently lives in Canada. Let's give our guests a virtual round of applause.
I always love virtual applause.
I didn't hear anything, Shari, but
I didn't hear anything. It was all virtual.
It was virtual.
Anyway, Anthony, it's so good to talk to you again. So good to see you again. I am a huge fan of your work, and I particularly love the Hawthorne series. It's one of my favorites of all time. So before we get started on The Twist of a Knife, which is the 4th book in the series, can you give us a little overview of the Hawthorne series for people that may not be familiar?
Certainly, but first of all, Shari, I want to say how very kind it is of you to take time out to do this interview with me. And for those of you listening, I want to say that Shari and I have met quite a few times now at our literary festivals, and I am as much a fan of your work as mine. I think to produce a book as huge as your very first book and to continue a career when you weren't even going to be a writer, as far as I can tell from what you've told me in the past, you were, before you were writing, you were doing all sorts of, you're a lawyer and all sorts of other things. But it's wonderful to be talking to you because it's lovely to talk to a friend and to somebody whose work I so much admire. So I will now answer your question. Forgive me.
Thank you.
Hawthorne, where did he come from? I was asked by my publishers to do a series. This is the sort of the golden grail of publishing, which is where you have a main character who you meet many, many times, and a series of whodunits and murder mysteries. And looking at detective stories, particularly whodunits, which are of a sort of Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, Ellery Queen style, I realized that every detective had been done. And so I began to think, how can I do a detective story in a way that is completely new and original? And I had this sort of weird idea. Suppose the author of the book, who is the cleverest person in the book, the guy who knows everything about the murder, the clues, the suspects, the red herrings, before a single word has been written, perhaps, supposing the author was the sidekick. And so I came up because in a book, the sidekick is the most stupid person in the book. Or often, you think about Hastings to Poirot or Watson to Holmes. The sidekick doesn't know anything. He trails behind the detective and asks questions and is kept in the dark until the very last chapter. So in a way, he goes, the writer is the cleverest, the sidekick is the stupidest. And I thought, what would happen if you swap places? So I wrote a book in which Hawthorne, a private detective, hires me as myself, Anthony Horowitz, to become his sidekick, and more than that, to write about him, because he wants to split the profits of the book 50-50. So we form a very, very uneasy alliance, and there I am, sort of, not in control of my own novel, desperately hoping that Hawthorne will find a solution, because if he doesn't, there won't be a novel, and not having a particularly nice time, because Hawthorne is not a very easy character. He has political views with which I vehemently disagree, and worst of all, he keeps calling me Tony. Nobody ever calls me Tony, but he does. So that is sort of the setup. That's how the books began, and that is what the sort of books are about.
Well, it's a wonderful setup. I love the whole, let me ask you this. How did you decide to put yourself as a character in a novel? Like, that's a very daring thing to do. You could have done it where you had an author sidekick that wasn't you. But you put yourself out there as the character, so that's quite daring, I think.
But as I say, what that does, first of all, is it does turn the whodunit upside down, because if you think about it, you know this from your books, if you write a clue, you're doing it quite deliberately, because the clue is, it points to who the killer is or what the secret is of the family or whatever it might be. But if you're inside the book, you don't know what the clues are to describe. So the whole writing process becomes completely different. Also, I was very keen to write about the nature of writing. For years and years, I had the idea of writing a book, a bit like Stephen King has done brilliantly on writing, or the other book, which has always been a great sort of, it's been my Bible, is William Goldman, Adventures in the Screen Trade. Wonderful books about the nature of writing. I'm fascinated by the whole idea of whodunits, about how they're written, how they're constructed, why people read them. Questions: why is a murder in the street disgusting and horrible and shocking, but a murder in a book is entertainment? These are the sort of things that I wanted to discuss. And by making myself a character in the book, it gave me a sort of a meta dimension that I could actually not only write murder mysteries, but write about murder mysteries. To anybody listening, I want to say very quickly that these books still read as absolutely straightforward, hopefully twisty and turny, exciting mysteries with a solution that will again, hopefully surprise you. But they're done just from a different angle. And that's why I put myself in.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely brilliant. And as you say, with the twist of a knife, it's the same thing. You've got your very ingenious plot, you've got all your suspects, you've got your lots of red herrings, you've got your Agatha Christie, angle to it all, and your great solution. But what I really love is that relationship between you and Hawthorne. So, you're always on the back foot, as you say. Hawthorne is always one step ahead. He's always looking at you sadly, like you can't find the clue. And I find that really, really entertaining and really fun. So what I'm wondering is, when you decided to put yourself into the books as a character, you must have had a lot of fun playing with that. So some of it is real, some of it's based on you, and obviously lots of it is all made up. So do you ever get yourself into trouble? So it's interesting. So for instance, you've got that great scene in The Word is Murder, where you're in a meeting with Steven Spielberg and Peter Jackson, and you've written a script for them based on one of the Tintin books, and you apparently have done the wrong Tintin book, and they throw the script out, and then Hawthorne barges in, and he doesn't even know who they are, but he charms them without, even trying, and frustrating you. And then, what rises up in my mind is like, okay, some of that, and you've met Spielberg, how much Hawthorne's obviously a fiction. It must be so fun for you to take elements of your real life and just make stuff up. And it makes for a really fun read, because we don't know what's, how much of it's made up. Your wife is in there. So, I've met your agent. I know it's not Hilary Stark. And I love reading about Hilary Stark, but I know that she's not your real agent. But I've met your wife, Jill, and I know she's your real wife, and I know she's a producer. So it's very entertaining.
Well, you're very kind, Shari, to say all that stuff. Well, first of all, my agent, just for what it's worth, since let's start with him, his name is Jonathan Lloyd, but at his agency, he is now called Hilda. Everybody knows him as Hilda. So I'm afraid truth
Hilda Stark,
fiction has caught up with him and demolished his career. And you've pointed out a scene which I particularly enjoyed writing, although I was a little nervous about whether Steven Spielberg and Peter Jackson would take offense. And you'll notice that the chapter is absolutely full of how much I admire both of them.
I know. So that's another question I have is like, do you have to get permission? So tell me about writing this and the risks you take in writing that, because
I didn't ask for permission, because if I was writing my autobiography, I wouldn't need to write to somebody to say, can I write about a meeting I had with you? So I took the view that since there was no offense there and nothing was given away in terms of what happened in the meeting, in fact, the meeting didn't even take place in London, it took place in another country. So it is fictionalized in its thing. But the fact remains that at the time that book is set, I did have that opportunity. And incidentally, since you mentioned Tintin, my love of Tintin to anybody watching this Zoom will be obvious to them, because there on one side is the Tintin rocket, there's Tintin up on the top there, and some of you may have noticed Thompson and Thompson sitting over there. I am surrounded by Tintin memorabilia and do love Tintin. And that was a very happy experience. Although in the book, of course, it is utterly and completely ransacked and ruined by Hawthorne. And I think that part of the pleasure of the books is trying to work out what is real and what isn't. We're talking about The Twist of a Knife, which is about a play of mine called Mind Game, which is put on in a theatre in London, the Vaudeville Theatre, and gets absolutely vicious reviews from the critics. And then subsequently, one of those critics is murdered. A lady called Harriet Throsby is found dead with a knife in her chest. The knife belongs to me, and I become the suspect. Now, how much of that is true? I can say, no spoiler here, I didn't kill her. I have never murdered anybody deliberately in my life. But that said, I did have a play called Mind Game. It was on at the Vaudeville Theatre in London. If you go and visit the Vaudeville Theatre, as I did when I was writing the book, I was very happy to see the poster for the play is still there backstage. It is also true, I'm afraid, that the play very much divided the critics. Half of them hated it, the other half loathed it. So I had a really tough time from the critics and such. And the play is described in the book. And I think it's, when I first pitched this idea to the publishers, they were quite nervous. They thought, is this going to be a writer boasting about himself and, using the character in a book to say, look, what a great writer I am, look at the success I've had and everything. And I said to them, no, that's not the idea at all. First of all, I'm only a minor character. I am the narrator. I am in the new book, I'm the main suspect too, but mainly I'm just the narrator. And the second thing is that the Anthony in the book is really not that bright. He doesn't do too well. I mean, nothing good ever seems to happen to him. And I think that what you pointed out, that sort of relationship with Hawthorne, who is really quite difficult and even unpleasant, is part of the fun of it. Because also, I'm desperately trying. Normally, when you write a book, as I don't need to tell you, Shari, you pretty much know everything about your main character. In the Hawthorne books, I know nothing, and I'm trying to find out. I keep asking him, why are you so difficult? What happened to you? What happened in this town called Reeth in Yorkshire seems to be important to you? And who are all these people who surround you? Why are you? I know that Hawthorne is divorced, but he's still married to the same person, and they have a child. They seem to be very close. What's going on there? So I'm desperately in every book trying to find out more and more about him. And the worst thing about Hawthorne is he won't tell me a thing.
Which is totally frustrating for you.
And for the reader aspect, all they get is clues, quite a lot in a new book.
Yeah. But I do think that a big part of the amusement of the book is that relationship between you and Hawthorne, and how he's always one step ahead of you on the clues, and you just can't get it. And of course, we know, that's the case with Anthony Horowitz, the character, but Anthony Horowitz, the writer, you're the one pulling all the strings, you're writing the book, but it's just so fun to see you as a sort of a bumbling buffoon in a way.
I'm not quite, I wouldn't go that far. Okay. Much of a buffoon, because it's one of the mistakes people make about Hastings, for example, in the relationship with Poirot. And I wrote Agatha Christie's Poirot on television for many, many years. I loved writing for Hugh Fraser, who played Hastings against the wonderful Sir David Suchet as Poirot. And the thing about him is, Hastings wasn't the brightest. He was he was a bit he wasn't able to solve a crime. And actually he did come across as a little bit of a buffoon. But, then he was based in his turn on Watson, and Watson to Sherlock Holmes. Watson is a very smart individual. He's very bright and clever. So I don't think it always follows that the sidekick is an idiot. I think that they're just used as that. You know, when I'm writing a murder mystery, I always, you know, like Magpie Murders and Moonflower Murders, the sidekicks in those books always are used to divert attention. So if a sidekick in one of my books asks, what is this ring doing on the desk? Then it means that the ring is irrelevant. And what they should have been asking is, what is this pen doing on the desk? You know, they've diverted you to the wrong thing to look at. I quite like using that sort of, you know, they're not sort of stupid, but they're very helpful in diverting the reader from what they should be guessing.
So I wanted to ask you about, you know, in the books, you talk about writing a lot. That's one of the things you want to do. You talk about, you're very self-deprecatory in the books, in the case the writers. So for instance, you know, Hawthorne has a better relationship with your agent than you do. Or you talk about how, you know, the lights are going out in the marquee and soon you'll just be, you know, anon for anonymous and so on. So do you find it humbling in a way to be a writer? Or are you just having fun with it? Or
no, I don't find it humbling. I find it enormously empowering. I mean, I love writing. I have always been passionate about writing. I knew I was going to be a writer when I was 10 years old. And it's a funny thing about being a writer versus a best-selling writer, which is that nothing much changes. I wrote 10 books before I sort of hit the big time, if you like, with Stormbreaker, the first Alex Rider novel in the year 2000, which sort of started me on a sort of a, you know, on a major trajectory in my career. And so I went from being a sort of a fairly struggling writer to being a sort of a successful writer. And it often occurs to me that what's changed? I'm still sitting by myself in a room. You know, I'm still alone 10 hours a day. Maybe the room is a little bit bigger and the seats is a little bit more comfortable, but actually, writers aren't celebrities. We writers we have a sort of a funny sort of position. People know our names. They often don't know our faces, which I think is great. Who wants to be known in the 21st century?
I agree.
Every single person in the world is carrying one of these and can photograph you scratching your backside or poking your nose on a street corner. And so we, you know, your question is it humbling being a writer? No, it's empowering and it's exciting and it's a wonderful thing, particularly writing for young people and getting young people into books and into literacy and into reading. That is something I'm very happy to have done with my life. But at the same time, I have never had the vanity to think that I am somebody clever or somebody, a star or a celeb, any of those things. I am a workman sitting in a room by myself for 10 hours a day, producing stories, which, thank heaven, people seem to like reading.
Yeah, it's sort of a myth, you know, people say, you know, writers write for the money, but every writer I know wrote for years and years and years before they made any money. And then they hit it big and they still write for years and years and years, even after they don't need the money. So that's not why writers write. Writers write because they want to write books.
I used to say that. I used to say, especially to children, that if you write for money, you'll never be successful because it's the wrong urge. It's the wrong impulse. I write stories. I often say I write stories the same way an arsonist lights a fire. And that, you know, an arsonist is happy just to strike a match and look at the flame, but more excited if he's burning a pile of pages, and even more excited if the desk goes up in flames, and then the house, and then actually what the arsonist really wants is the whole city or indeed the whole world on fire. And I think writers are a little bit like that in a way. But you know, as I say, the actuality of being a writer is a very quiet one. It's a very sort of, you know, it's just what I do, what I love doing.
Yeah, same. It is quite a...
Well, sorry, I was going to say though, sorry, the other half I was going to say was, I used to say that writers can't write and shouldn't write for money. Then I met Jeffrey Archer. And Jeffrey Archer, who was broke and bankrupt, wrote a book entirely to make money.
Really?
And that was so not a penny more, not a penny less. And it made him a fortune. I also have met Sir Frederick Forsyth. I should say Lord Archer and Sir Freddie Forsyth. Same thing. He ran out of money, so he sat down to make the money to write The Day of a Jackal. I think they're both terrific writers, by the way. I'm not descrying them, but and The Day of a Jackal is an absolutely wondrous novel. I mean, you know, it's a book everybody wishes they'd written in a way. But the fact is that the original impulse was simply to earn money. And Freddie has also said publicly, but that's still the only reason he writes, which is to earn. And it does make me smile that that there are no rules where writers are concerned. We all do it for different reasons, in different ways. We all have different successes and different worries and concerns, and yet we are, we are all blood brothers and sisters too.
So tell us more, like, are there going to be more Hawthorne novels?
That's an easier question to answer. Yes, I'm planning 12. I might do more, but I think 12 is sort of the right sort of figure. I've done 4. I'm just about to start work on number 5, which I'm very much looking forward to. It's a very, very peculiar meta novel and such. And I have 6 planned and contracted, which is nice as well. But I think 12 is sort of the figure I'm looking at. I never know. I mean, I said I'd only write 10 Alex Riders, and I'm now on number 14.
Yeah. No, I'm really glad to hear there's going to be more Hawthorne, because, how are you going to up the stakes after having you accused of murder and thrown in jail?
Well, it's interesting. The next one, I'll tell you this much. In the next one, I was a little bit concerned. I took too much of a front seat in Twist of a Knife. So in the next one, I'm much less involved. I'm sort of not even the assistant in this next one. The setup is that we have no more books, and the publishers are getting a bit tetchy and saying, come on, we need a new book. So I write about one of Hawthorne's cold cases, his older ones, before I met him. So there's a different assistant in the book. And the fun of this book is that Hawthorne and I argue about the writing of it from the first page to the last. He keeps on telling me I've made mistakes. That's not how it was, and you've missed this clue. And he said, you've got to mention the banana in the bowl on the table. And I say, oh, why, Hawthorne? What does it matter about this banana? He said, well, obviously, if the banana had gone off, that tells you who the killer is. I'm making it up as I go along, Shari, but that's a sort of inner dialogue that's going to go along in the background of this book. While even as it's being written, I'm trying to second guess Hawthorne. I've got lots of ideas for it. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think. This book.
Good.
And it's set just around the corner from where I live, here in this Richmond, on the edge of London.
Oh, cool. So you mentioned in it, The Twist of a Knife, you talk about how frustrating it is that Hawthorne's a cipher and you don't know anything about him, and how you really want to get to know more about him. So I assume we're going to get to know more about Hawthorne?
Well, in The Twist of a Knife, we do get a lot of secrets coming out. So we've discovered a very interesting guy called Morton, who I think may have a large part to play in the future. Hawthorne, it now turns out, belongs to some sort of secret organization, and the house where he lives is part of that, and it's obviously an important part of his life. And I think in the next book, I might very well go and try and find Morton and have a word with him. And I'm very, very keen to meet the wife, who first got me into this trouble by turning up at one of my talks and sort of cajoling me into taking on the Hawthorne novels. So yes is the answer to your question. In the next book, in this book we learn a certain amount, and in the next one we'll learn even more. But what happened in Reeth all those years ago, and what turned him into himself, that I think you have to wait for book 12.
I was figuring that would be the big thing at the end. What happened in Reeth? I have another question about, you've done so many books that you've turned into film or TV. I loved the Magpie Murders on the BBC, by the way. I did finally get to see it. It didn't show in Canada properly when it was supposed to show, but I managed to see it. Loved that show. Are you going to adapt the Hawthorne series for TV? And if so, are you going to play yourself? And what would that be like? Are you an actor or?
Lots of things to answer there. First of all, the quick answer to the last question is no, I would never play myself. I can't. It would be a disaster. I think, I do turn up in my own TV shows. I've been in Foyle's War.
I've seen you. I saw you in Magpie Murders.
Magpie Murders in the cemetery. I do like making an appearance. So it is possible that I will do a speaking brief appearance to get the meta quality of it aside. I have this idea that if we were to do the Hawthorne novels, I would meet the person playing me at the very beginning of the show. So I'd actually have a moment
like
sort of
on screen
backstage. Because I think that what we would have to do is, these are books about books. So if it was a TV series, I'd make it a TV series about a TV series. So it needs to move out of the world of publishing and into the world of TV. And I would be there both as an exec producer. My wife, Jill Green, could very well make it. She made Foyle's War and Midsomer Murders. But it's early days. Will it get made? I don't know, to be honest with you. No one has. I've had a couple of nibbles of interest from producers, but you know how it is in the current industry. It's sort of, it's a weird thing that despite the sort of the explosion of platforms, Netflix, Amazon, Disney, and all the rest of them, Apple, et cetera, it actually seems more difficult for writers to sell their books and to sell their scripts than it was before. And the reason for that is that in the old days, I could go to the BBC and ITV, knock on the door, have lunch with the head of the whole thing and say, hey, how about a detective series set in the Second World War, which is incidentally what happened. And that was 16 years of Foyle's War as a result of one lunch. Nowadays, the person I'm talking to is on the other side of the world, may not have a name, and I don't even know what they're looking for anymore. What is the zeitgeist? It's very, very hard to know. But that said, I think it might happen one day. And as to who will play me, we might check George Clooney's availability. You tell me.
I think that would be a good choice. Be a good choice.
Well, we'll see.
One thing that came out very strongly in The Twist of a Knife was your love of the theater. So obviously we know you've written plays and so on. Can I ask about your collaboration with Ragnar?
You certainly can. It's top secret. But for you, Shari, I will of course mention that Ragnar Jónasson, who actually we both spent a very, very happy week with in Reykjavik and around Iceland, has had this idea of writing a murder mystery, or rather, we've talked together about collaborating on something, and we had the idea of doing a play, a whodunit for the stage. It's a very interesting fact, but very, very few straight whodunits have ever worked on the stage. In fact, the only one I can really think of course, is The Mousetrap. There have been spoofs, Sleuth, for example, or Ira Levin did Death Trap, which is enormous fun as well. But they're sort of both taking the mickey out of plays and out of theatre. So to do a straight whodunit on the stage is quite a challenge. But then we came up with an interesting idea, something that hasn't been done before. And I thought, wow, that's quite worth exploring. Ragnar incidentally works incredibly fast. You throw something at him, and 5 minutes later, he's got the entire thing worked out in his head, and no need to talk anymore. It's ready. I'm not like that. I really, really need to structure and think and plan it. So it'll be an interesting collaboration. One of us might well end up murdering the other. I don't know which way around it will be.
I'd like to see that TV show. The two of you working together. So what did you say the name of it was?
Of the play?
Yeah.
I didn't say it was. We haven't got it yet. We haven't
got it yet. Okay. So I want to know when that's written and when
we're going to start
I'll fly over to London
meeting,
and see it.
He's coming to Richmond in January for a week, and then I should go to Reykjavik for another week, and so we'll do it, on the thing, and then we'll see. I mean, we live in very, very difficult and uncertain times. The theatre in England is in a difficult place. Will it happen? I don't know. I'm going to see. Excuse me. Thank you.
Yeah, they are very tricky times. Very tricky times.
It is very, very worrying.
Yeah. So you've done a lot of novels. You've done a lot of screenwriting. Do you have a preference? Does one of them? Do you enjoy one of them more than the other?
I love all my writing pretty much equally. I love writing. I love it, and I don't even when I'm writing. Have you adapted any of your own work, Shari?
I have not, and I've been asked about that, and I'm actually starting to wonder if maybe I should learn how to do that. But they're very different skills, are they not? But if you understand story, it should be. They
are different.
I have not adapted,
especially in murder mystery. Doing a murder mystery on TV and doing one in books is a very, very different world. I don't want to outline the difference. I'll go back to your question of which I prefer. I think that by and large, I'm happiest and most comfortable writing novels because everything is mine. I control the world, and I don't need to worry about budgets, about actors, and about my wife Jill Green, who is going to produce it and tell me the scene's too expensive, and such. And also, there is a certain sort of security in writing books because I'm a brand. As an author, I'm a brand. As a screenwriter, I am an employee. There is a difference, and so. Of all the work I've done, funnily enough, the work I'm probably proudest of, I've said to you, I love all my work equally. I love writing. I'm not saying it's all genius and brilliant, but nonetheless, I have enjoyed it all on the same level. But it's the Alex Rider books because I'm writing one at the moment. This is it here in front of the screen. I was just working on it before we began the talk. I think that I meet so many people now that I'm so old, who are in their 20s and 30s. And they're often working in the media. Some of them are writers, some of them are in television, some of them are just in a world, some of them connect with me through they might be doing the lighting when I'm doing an interview. And they come to me and say, when I was 8, I read your books, and that's got
My
me
kids read your books.
Well, that's what I mean. They're probably quite getting on a bit now. They must be, that must be sort of, teenagers or something. So,
Mid-20s, yeah.
Well, there you are. And just to have had that, I always put it like this. By accident, I have been one molecule, in the life of a great many young people. And that molecule has been a benign molecule and has helped. And I can't think of anything better I could have done with my life than that, because it's what I wanted to do, which is to write, but also out of writing, some good may have come. So of all the writing, I guess my kids' books are the ones that are dearest to my heart, closest to my heart. But that said, I'm enormously proud of the Hawthorne books. I think they're going to be a fun, long-running series. The Bonds, Sherlock Holmes, and all the others. Each one to me is, I go through life hoping that every book will be better than the one before. I'm not saying they are, but I don't rest on my laurels. I'm always trying to do better. So, we'll see. Hawthorne 5, 6, then another Magpie Murders book. Incidentally, you mentioned Magpie on TV. I think it's going to get another launch next year on a bigger platform as well. So more people will be able to see it. And with a bit of luck, we'll start making Moonflower Murders, the sequel, soon as well.
I hope so. That would be good. I'd love to see that.
Manville next week, as it happens. She's a wonderful actress, and she's actually in The Crown at the moment, doing a brilliant job as Princess Margaret. And she's an absolutely lovely person. She lives not very far away, so we're all having a pre-Christmas drink together.
Oh, how nice!
Chat about the future and hopefully a return of Susan Ryland in Moonflower.
Oh, neat. So you say you love writing, and whenever I read anything of yours, I always imagine you as having a rollicking good time writing it. Is there anything? Do you ever doubt your work? Do you ever want to rip something up? Do you ever, or is it always just smoothly flying off your?
All the time, I doubt my work. I doubt it at different stages in the journey.
Well, that's so good for me to hear.
I would say the same for you. Let me tell you my doubt point.
Yeah, I want to hear your doubt points.
I start with an idea. So I'm going to do, I don't know, a Hawthorne novel or an Alex Rider novel set in a certain world. And I then sit down and, I think about the idea for maybe 3 months, 4 months. I structure it all out and think about it. And just before I start writing it, I have my big doubts. Is this going to work? Is this a good idea? Is this a world that children will enjoy or that adults will enjoy? So that's the first big doubt and the starting of the writing. Then I begin the writing. Once I started writing, I very seldom have any doubts at all. That point, it's going to be the most brilliant book in the world. It's going to sell 10 million copies, win every prize in the country and the world, and et cetera, et cetera. I finish the book, and then the doubts come back. Oh my God, this book is awful. It's terrible. The publishers are going to hate it. My readers are going to hate it. It's useless. It's no good at all. I'm going to be found out. That that syndrome. The writer.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear. I'm so glad to hear you say this, because by the time I finish my book, I hate it. Like, I'm so sick of it. I think, no. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I don't hate the book. I'm not sick of it, but I think it's no good. I say to myself, it's just not very good, and it's just not what I wanted. At the moment, I'm just writing. I'm literally on the last 2 chapters of Alex Rider, and I've come up with this enormous climax. I mean, it's a massive ticking clock's climax, a ticking clock climax. God, that's a mouthful. But in this case, I've got 5 or 6 different strands. Things are happening in America, they're happening in England, they're happening in Australia, and here and there, the characters are moving, and everything is coming closer and closer like that. And this morning, I woke up and I got out of bed and I thought, none of this is going to work. It's all completely hopeless. What have you done to bring yourself to this point? You cannot get out of this book. But then I went for a walk with the dog in the rain, and it was, and I thought about it a little bit more, and I'm now writing it, and it is all working. And what I say to writers often is, and I've collaborated a few times, and it never works because I'm not an easy person to work with. But I always say that it's the simple answer that will work. If you have to work hard for your resolution, if you have to struggle to bring everything together, something has gone wrong. Look at your characters, look at the plot, look at the world you've created, and if you can find the simplicity in it, the obvious thing, then it'll work. And that's what I've done with this book. I mean, at the end of the day, I just went the simple way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the forced thing is never good. It's never good. But it's funny to hear you say that. Like, I'm happy to hear you say that, because I just assumed you always had a fabulous time writing and they came out and they were great. You had no doubts. But I'm the opposite.
I do love writing. I do love, when I'm actually in the zone, which you'll recognize that moment when the outside world disappears and the unpaid bills you forget about, and the slight row you've had with your wife or partner the night before vanishes, and you're just simply in the world of the book, and I always liken it to being jumping into a fast flowing river, where all you can do is just swim with the current, avoid the bulrushes and the boulders and the sharks and the piranhas, and just go with it, like or down a flume in an amusement park, where you're carried through it. And that's when it's like that, it's a sheer joy. And right now, I'm sitting here talking to you, but at the same time, I'm looking at how many pages here. I've just typed up page 153 of this book. And just to have done all that, to have it all here in front of me, here it is, and it's so much of it. And it's lovely.
It's your baby.
It's my baby. I didn't say it. I didn't.
So let me ask you, editing, pain or pleasure? How do you feel about editing?
Do you mean editing myself or being edited by my publisher?
Being edited by your publisher. Like, obviously you really enjoy writing, and then when the editing process starts, how is that for you?
I don't like the editing process a lot. I'll tell you why. The one I really dislike is the copy editor. The copy editor, there's Anthony, this chapter finishes at 7:14 in the Bahamas with Alex Rider walking into the sunset, but actually it's March, so the sunset wouldn't have happened until 8:25. And you just want to sort of, the whole dream sort of cracks and breaks in your head. Or something like, Anthony, this character that you've got appearing in chapter 23, you murdered them in chapter 16. So how come, you've forgotten they're still alive? So it can be just something that the copy editor is too clever or I'm too stupid. But I do find the copy editing process quite tough. I also find the editing process difficult, particularly in this world of woke and PC sort of extremism, whereas I tried so hard not to cause offense in my writing, but sometimes, I'll make no secret about the twist of when I've had to have a sensitivity read because one of the characters is a Native American. And
I just had my first sensitivity read. I've never had one before.
And the sensitivity read, I'm not opposed to these things, Shari. I'm not opposed to woke. I'm not opposed. I think it's right that we should be aware of each other's interests and ethnicities and backgrounds and histories and it is not the job of the writer to cause offense. But at the same time, I do find nowadays that it is very easy to fall foul of a sort of a new rigorousness, of a new refusal to accept anything other than a certain narrow view of life. And I find that quite difficult. There's a character in this new Alex Rider book I'm contemplating. It's a character in a game. It's got a computer game in it. Now, I wanted an animal that had a sort of a peculiarity. So I came up with the idea of a blind hedgehog. And the idea was there'd be a little figure sitting in a chair with little black glasses on and spikes, and it makes me smile. I was brought up on Beatrix Potter, Mrs. Tiggywinkle. So then I thought, well, hold on a minute. Is that a causing offense? Is the word blind a word now that we can even use anymore? Do I have to have a visually impaired hedgehog? And if I'm doing it with a sort of a smile attached to it, am I causing offense to people who and again, I have to hesitate now. I'm about to say who have a handicap or a disability. I'm not sure either of those two words are used anymore. Because, it is no longer a handicap necessarily to be different. So that sort of thinking, and it's not the thinking that bothers me. I'm happy to adapt to a modern age, and I'm happy to try and understand the new sensitivity. But I do think that it doesn't help writers to have to constantly
check themselves.
Their shoulder.
Yeah. All right. I have to stop you there and go to the questions because I was supposed to do that 2 minutes ago. So question number 1. We loved Foyle's War. Can you talk a little bit about how it came about in the making of it? That led us to reading your books. Have a long way to go. All right, you're going to have to be, I've got a few questions here. So
I'll be brief, Shari. I apologize for talking so long on that last question. Foyle's War, I've already mentioned, the lunch with the head. I had a nanny who was in the war. My nanny, I was born in 55. My nanny lost her fiance in the Battle of Britain. She used to talk to me about the war all the time. I grew up with the war. I was born in Stanmore, which is where the war was won. It was the head of Bomber Command. The RAF were there. The war has been in my blood for as long as I can remember. And Foyle's War came about because I wanted to write a murder mystery series where the murders were less relevant than the world in which they took place, in which they weren't really about murder at all. My favorite episode of Foyle, which is called The French Drop, doesn't even have a crime in it. There's no crime committed in the whole episode. And yet, nonetheless, it is a murder mystery story. So that was where it came about. It was from my nanny, who is incidentally the character of Sam Stewart is based on her, and about a desire to move. Having done Midsomer Murders for years, I wanted to move into a different realm. So I came up with that idea.
Okay, what is the best piece of writing advice you've received that you still use in your own writing today?
William Goldman. I mentioned him in the as having written a book called Adventures in the Screen Trade, and the 3 words that I remember him saying, which are from that book and which stay with me in my life: nobody knows anything. When you're writing, you don't know if you're writing the biggest hit in the world or the biggest turkey. You don't know whether you're going to make £1 million or you're going to be fired. You just have to believe in yourself, go with it, and hope for the best. And at the end of the day, when a publisher says to you, Anthony, chapter 6 is too long, you may take their advice and you may rewrite chapter 6, but you also have to remember that nobody knows anything. You are as likely to be right as they are. It's an interesting, those 3 words have been the pedestal on which I have built my career.
You know, it's a lot of faith, isn't it? Writing. A lot is done on faith.
Self-confidence, self-belief, love of what you do. And as you said, I think it's not about a desire to be famous or to make money. It's a desire to tell stories in the best way you can.
Right. My husband and I are loving Magpie Murders on PBS. Will there be a Moonflower Murders adaptation show as well? And I think you talked a bit about that.
It's looking extremely likely. I will report back after my dinner with Lesley.
Great. Okay.
And thank you, by the way, for enjoying Magpie Murders. It was a wonderful show to work on. And I have to say that the 2 heroes of that show, 3 heroes, there were so many. My wife, Jill Green, who actually managed to get me to adapt the scripts properly. It took me a very, very long time to get it right. If I'd listened to her at first, I would have saved a year of my life. But nonetheless, that's how we work. Wonderful direction from Peter Cattaneo. I mean, he is the best director I think I've ever worked with. He made a show called... God, what was his show called? The Full Monty? Is that Peter Cattaneo? Anyway, it's one of the greatest British films ever made. And of course, Lesley Manville. I couldn't have asked for a better cast. I was so happy.
It was so clever, the drifting in and out of the 2 timelines in that show when you're going back and forth. It was so subtly done.
That was my wife's input. That was her idea.
Oh, yeah?
Question. Because
congratulate Jill for me. I thought that was really
Lesley Manville in. From the very beginning. In the book, she only turns up on page 250, but you can't have your star waiting until episode 4 to show up on the screen because people would have stopped watching. So as soon as we knew Lesley was going to be in it from the start, then it meant that her story, set in the modern day, would have to go side by side with Atticus Punt's story, set in 1955. And so suddenly we had these 2 time periods running together, which meant that we could jump from one to the other with ease, which is what we did.
Yeah, it was cool. And I loved the actor who did Atticus Punt.
Oh, Tim McMullen, he's coming to dinner as well. And I work with him. Anybody who's watching this may recognize him from Foyle's War. He did 3 seasons of Foyle's War with us. Lovely actor. So I'm going to let the dog in because he's barking. And
okay, yeah.
Chase, stop it. This is my evil COVID dog ruining my interview with Shari Lapena.
Bring him on. Put him on the table.
Yeah.
Put him on the desk. What kind of dog is he?
He's a black lamb. Chasey, come in.
Nice. All right, so we've got here, will the Hawthorne series be made into a show? We have talked about that.
I think it might eventually, but as yet, no news.
I do like the idea of doing it as a TV show about a TV show to get you around being the actor, although I would have loved to see you acting in that. I
might do a little cameo in it. I have got this idea that it begins with the producer saying, Anthony, this is the person who's going to be playing you in the show. And somebody who walks in is completely different to me. And it's sort of a shock reaction from me about are you sure? So there might, I don't know. That was just a little thought I had, but I haven't really been given any thought yet because nobody, as I say, has come forward with a proposal.
As a big fan of Magpie Murders, are there plans for a second series? Well, that would be Moonflower Murders, right?
Yes.
That's
And the
the
third book,
follow-up.
incidentally, I have in my head. I have an
Oh,
idea
you're
for
doing a
the
third
third
book?
book of the series,
Okay.
Magpie Moonflower, and one more. But there's one more, again, it's got something I have an idea to do, but as far as I know, it's never been done in a crime novel before. So I'm going to do it.
Wow, like I just love all your creative, like your ideas are always so fresh and different and off the wall. It's really,
Well,
you take a lot of risks. I think
I
that's
think that
important, eh?
I've always said that writing is itself an
A
adventure.
risk.
You can't
Yeah.
just sit back and do it and do the same book. I could have written 45 Alex Rider novels by now, but I
Mhm.
love testing myself and going into dangerous areas, and theater, writing plays. I mean, goodness, I mean, it is so painful and awful, but nonetheless, I'm determined. Maybe I'll do it with Ragnar. I'm determined to write a play that finally works.
Someone's saying, thank you for bringing such joy to my life. What brings you joy?
What a lovely question to whoever asked that question. Joy is so important, particularly when the world is in such a sort of a dark and difficult place. We have to remember that joy is all around us. What brings me joy? My children, obviously, my sons, 2 of them, my naughty dog who just barked, but really walking with my dog is my greatest pleasure in life. I live next door to the River Thames here, and I go out there and I walk with him and look at the birds and the ducks and the water and the boats, and I feel complete happiness. Walk and my wife, I think family and location and writing, of course. I have a lot of joy in my life. I'm very, very lucky.
What percentage of the information about yourself in the novels is true? I was asking you that. I'm always Googling you to check.
I would say, again, with the reminder that the books are not about me. I'm not a major character in them. I would say that the content is around about 70% true. Quite high.
That much?
But the truth, yes,
Okay.
but the truth is then twisted. It's always twisted.
Yes.
So, for example, although The Twist of a Knife is about a play called Mind Game, the actual play that it was based on, or should have been based on, was a play I wrote much later called Dinner with Saddam, which also was equally hated. And Harriet Throsby could quite easily have been the victim of that second play. But the trouble with that was there were too many characters in the play for the book to work. So I flipped the 2 plays round and pretended it was a modern version of Mind Game. So that's a case of it's true, I did write Mind Game, but it's false, I did not write Mind Game in 2015.
Okay. And you've mentioned this, but how does the Anthony character relate or compare to Watson you mentioned earlier?
I think I'd like to think that, look, I've written 2 Sherlock Holmes novels. I revere the work of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And I always say that what is so wonderful about the Sherlock Holmes novels is that it depicts the greatest friendship in British literature. The friendship between Holmes and Watson is really an extraordinary and a very precious thing. And the books only work because of it. Sherlock Holmes is not a particularly attractive character. He's aloof, he's difficult, he takes drugs, he's very untidy, he has no conversation, he doesn't really go to the theatre or to music. He's a very narrow focused man. But we love Holmes because Watson loves Holmes. And there are moments in the stories, in one of the stories, Watson gets injured and Holmes immediately breaks down. I mean, are you all right? What's happened? And you realize that Holmes, in his own way, the Edwardian, Platonic way, loves Watson. So it's this wonderful friendship. And I couldn't compare my relationship to Hawthorne to that on many counts. First of all, I don't have Doyle's genius. But secondly, I sort of like Hawthorne. And I think with every book that passes, I like him more. But love, I think we'll have to wait to number 12.
Got a ways to go.
Yeah.
How do you feel about Magpie Murders, the series, versus Magpie Murders, the novel?
Well, I think what is great about them is they're very different. At the end of the day, we put an awful lot of new material into the book, particularly about Lesley Manville's character, Susan Ryland, her past, her relationship with her sister, her relationship with her father. That doesn't really appear in the books because, once we had an actor of Lesley Manville's renown and her talent, it felt ridiculous not to put her in every scene. She's so wonderful, to give her material to use. So that led me to drop characters out of the book, which would have been too complicated anyway. There were too many of them. And to focus more on the real people, which I think is why the series works so well. So the answer to the question, which I think is which not so which do I prefer of them, but the relationship between them, I'm just proud of the fact that you can read the book and enjoy it on one level and see the TV show, and even though you will know who did it, we didn't change that, you can still enjoy many other things on a different level there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, for Anthony, are you involved with the audiobooks of your novels? The narrators for the Magpie books were brilliant, but the narrator for the Hawthorne books struggled with his portrayal of women in the first 2 novels, and then dramatically improved for the 3rd book, A Line to Kill. Is this something you pay attention to?
Well, I'm not sure I entirely accept that criticism. You're talking about Rory Kinnear, who does, I think, an absolutely wonderful job on the books. I think it is fair enough to say that as he's gone with them, he's now done 4 in a row. He has relaxed into them more because he now knows me so well. I see him occasionally and we talk, and I am very much beholden to him, but I don't have any input. No, I don't have any involvement as a producer or anything of that sort. I don't go to the recordings, and I hear them for the first time when you do.
Well, you wouldn't have the time. I love your books. Thank you. My question, it just jumped. My question to either of you, do you have stories in your head all the time, or do you have a theme that you work from and then figure it out?
Why don't you answer?
Oh boy. The hardest thing for writing for me is coming up with an idea. That's actually, I suspect that's not your problem at all. But for me, I'm always flummoxed because I worry about finding an idea that's original and hasn't been done to death already. So, I think the hardest thing for me is to come up with an idea that I think has enough that's new about it, enough to keep me excited for the whole long thing of writing a book. I don't have stories in my head all the time. I wish I did. I suspect you do, though, right, Anthony?
Your books are much more high concept than mine. That's something that, mine are very... I belong in a sort of a very classical world where there are a never-ending variety of variations. No, never-ending amount of variations. Somebody kills somebody else for a reason. Somebody kills somebody else for a reason. It's so simple, but actually you can go 100 ways with that, and who those 2 people are and the reason for the murder. So I do have a lot of ideas in my head all the time. I mean, I'm always 3 or 4 books ahead of myself. Ideas fall on me as I walk the dog, and as I sit here at my desk, and it's a question of finding enough time to write them all. I mean, that's my sort of my headache, but not a headache. I love everything about my work, but I have a lot of ideas. Yeah.
I would actually like to be more like that. I get one good idea a year, and that's just about it.
I had 3 books published this year, Shari. So I mean, it's sort of that's slightly crazy, but I mean, it was sort of COVID backup. But I had a Bond novel, With a Mind to Kill, my 3rd final Bond novel, Twist of a Knife, which is a 4th Hawthorne, and I did a Diamond Brothers book, which I don't think is actually around in America or Canada. The Diamond Brothers are 2 of my other characters that I've written about for a long time. They were always all the books are film pastiches. So the first one was called Falcon's Malteser, instead of the Maltese Falcon, and then a Malteser instead in England is a malted milk ball.
We have those here.
The recent one is called Where Seagulls Dare. If you know the Clint Eastwood, Richard Burton film, one of my favorite movies when I was a boy. Turned into a diamond. So it's lovely to meet old characters that I haven't written about for a long time. So that's why I did it.
Will there be a sequel to Moonflower Murders? I think you said there will.
I mentioned I have a 3rd one in my head. Yep.
Do you have a title for that one yet?
No title and not much plot. I have an idea. Who
comes up with your titles? Is it you that comes up with your titles?
I come up with the titles, although sometimes the publishers fight me and make me change them, and I don't always agree, although I generally tend to do what they want, because I always say the publishers know, and that it's their job to know what will sell. But I find titles sometimes difficult, I must be honest. Sometimes I'll get a title long before the book is written, but sometimes I struggle to find them. The first Bond novel, Trigger Mortis, took me a long time to come with that title, and it's interesting how it divided people. Some people loved it, some people hated it. Puns do that to people, Trigger Mortis, and but I like that title. And With a Mind to Kill, which was the last Bond novel, I wanted to call it the Inhuman Element, which is actually an original Ian Fleming title. Somerset Maugham wrote a novel called The Human Element, and Ian Fleming had the idea of doing a Bond novel called The Inhuman Element. And I thought it was a great title to describe sort of the Soviet Union in 1963 and the sort of coldness and the barbarity and the sort of, brainwashing, etc. Inhuman. But I was talked out of it, and I'm not sure. With a Mind to Kill, which would you prefer, Shari?
I think With the Mind to Kill definitely says Bond more than an Inhuman Element does.
even though the inhuman element is actually the Ian Fleming title.
Yeah, I think it just.
All right, that's what they said, and in the end I agreed,
Yeah.
but I still wonder.
Will you be writing another Susan Ryland book? Yes, we've already
Yes.
answered that one. A bit confused. Do you write because you love doing it or for the money? Your discussion
I
of
think
Jeffrey
we've
Archer.
answered that one lots of times. I don't do it. I've only in my life written for money once. I took on a job running a TV show because I wanted to buy a house, and it was offered to me. I didn't think the TV show was going to be great, but nonetheless, it was going to pay very well. And I had the most miserable 6 months of my life writing it. It was just awful. And I remember saying to Jill, I was engaged to her at the time, I should have not taken it on, because, you know, the house will be tainted simply because of the misery of this series that I've been working on.
Yeah.
But there you go. I mean, you know, you put it down to experience and move on. But I think I'm still of the view that money, you know, it's easy enough to say it when you're getting it, when your books are selling and you are, you know, a best-selling author, to say, oh, the money doesn't matter. It even sounds a little bit pompous. Of course, money is important to be able to look after my children, to have a nice home, but that is still not the motivating factor. So I value money. I don't strive for it.
I've got quite a few questions here, and I'm sorry, we have one question left. Time for one more question. I'm going to go with, how do you approach something like the Bond Ian Fleming estate work, since Fleming's notes are from such a different era in so many ways? And is there any other writer's estate that you would love to work with and keep that character going?
Well, I've done Doyle and I've done Fleming, and there is something else I would do, because I think that these books are, I'm proud of them, I love doing them, but they are not my core work. My core work is now Hawthorne. The Ian Fleming estate was delightful. They were very, very easy to work with. So was the Doyle estate. I have actually worked with the Doyle estate a second time. There's a book coming out next year, which I am a co-author on, which is in the world of Sherlock Holmes. And the estate was very, very helpful and friendly. And the only reason I write these books is that these were the books that got me writing as a boy. I remember reading Dr. No when I was 11 years old and being blown away. I remember seeing Sean Connery in that first film, the same one, Dr. No, the first film made. I remember reading all of Sherlock Holmes in my late teens and loving those books. It is the love of those books that when you're invited to then spend 6 months of your life in the world of those books, how can you refuse? But I've done my work on both of them, and I think from now on I'm going to stick to myself and my own work.
Sounds good. I've got 1 o'clock.
I've got 6 o'clock. Time for me to go and cook my supper.
Yes.
Yeah. Before you all go, we would love to hear what you all are reading.
Okay. I am absolutely loving, just finished this one, Robert Harris, Act of Oblivion. It's a really, really good historical novel about a British politician, I guess you would say, going after the people that killed King Charles I. So my huge recommendation on this one. I loved it.
And I can say to Shari that I totally support that. I read it. I think Robert Harris is a wonderful novelist. I think that's his best novel, certainly since Fatherland. I can't wave my book at the camera, and I'm afraid you can't buy it until next year. But I've just finished reading Liz Nugent's new book called Strange Sally Diamond, which is a very, very dark thriller that takes you to some very uncomfortable places with a central character who is, to say she is flawed is an understatement. She is like nobody you've ever met. And this book, I think, will be the book everybody will be talking about next year, unless that is Shari brings out a new one herself.
Well, I have to agree on this Strange Sally Diamond. It's a brilliant book. And I was just thinking she's going to be getting a sensitivity read for sure on that one, I would think.
I think so, yes.
Anyway, it's a brilliant book. I have it here somewhere, but I don't know where.
Bright green cover.
Bright green cover, yes.
Anthony, Shari, thank you both for doing this event with Politics and Prose, and thank you to the 30 other bookstores that have joined this event as well. Thank you to the audience joining us today, taking the time out of your afternoon or evening, wherever you are across the United States, to listen to this discussion. Be sure to check out Anthony's book, The Twist of a Knife, available at all 30 bookstores. The links are in the chat. and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shari.
Thank you, Anthony. It's been great speaking to you.